When looking through the Risk of Rain 2 mod workshop for any potential challenge run ideas, I tend to gravitate towards characters that could be interesting to handle in such an environment. One that caught my eye for just how out of left field I found it was this one by Dragonix Modern Comms, which basically sends Pokemon into the world of Risk of Rain. That means today I answer the question, can you beat Risk of Rain 2 as a Pokemon trainer? By now you should have a grasp of how the rules work for a run like this. I have to play through Risk of Rain 2 on the highest available difficulty, that being Monsoon, and make it all the way to the champion battle with Mithrix and become the very best like no one ever was. Then I need to blast off again in my escape pod to complete the run. As you'd expect, I'll be using the Pokémon Trainer mod for this, which I'll provide in the description below. 2 additional entries in the rules for this run in particular. Since I have allies at my back already, I will only be allowed to add healing drones to my team. I will not be allowed to gain any other form of outside assistance. And finally, I will try to keep the damage I do to a minimum where possible. Due to the gameplay style of this character, that's usually not difficult at all, but there are certain items that can complicate that, so I'll steer clear of them where I can. Anyway, with that taken care of, let's do this. Our options for attacks, as you'd expect, are not the greatest, but where our versatility really shines is in our team of 6 Pokemon. The ones we have access to in particular are Venusaur, Mega Charizard X, Blastoise, Pikachu, Snorlax, and Glaceon. All of them have their own strengths and weaknesses as well as a standard attack and a special attack, and we'll be relying on them to do the heavy lifting. We can also choose our trainer from a selection of 6. Ash Ketchum, Red, Misty, May, Dawn, and Veteran, who I can only assume is supposed to be Giovanni. While this is purely cosmetic, I'd stuck with Red as I've already committed to putting him in the thumbnail. As is seemingly tradition at this point, we start out in Titanic Plains to get into the tall grass and get to grips with our kit, and I instantly learned that Pokemon trainers seemingly have the innate ability to double jump. I send Venusaur out first, and while he deals with the strange-looking wild Pokemon, I'll discuss how the trainer works. They cannot attack by themselves in pretty much any normal way. They are required to have a Pokemon at their side in order to do much of anything involving combat. What they can do is mark certain enemies with their primary to have them prioritize a certain foe, and by using their secondary they can make use of their special attack, which in Venusaur's case is the Solar Beam. The utility basically grants them a stat boost for a short amount of time, and Special allows you to swap between Pokemon in conjunction with the mouse wheel. They also have type advantages which have a small chance to grant additional benefits when they attack, but I won't pretend like I remember what they are. The Pokemon in your team also inherit all items you pick up, meaning that they will scale accordingly. Overall, the Pokemon Trainer is essentially a more hands-on version of Engineer. Rather than slapping down fire and forget turrets, you're instead actually managing and commanding creatures to wail on the enemy wildlife. All of that out of the way, things have been pretty standard as far as a run's beginning goes, although I found the teleporter in a very strange place by this cliffside. Having swapped to Blastoise to deal with the wisps in the air, I spent time gathering up some white items and made the tactical swap to Snorlax for the gold collecting minigame. His slams can cover a pretty big area, which is perfect for a holdout like this. The added stun doesn't hurt either. Then, once the shrine neared completion, I swapped to Charizard to deal with the spinny golem. Mega Charizard X does have the capability to be powerful, as 2 bursts of flamethrower bring it down with ease, but its janky flying leaves a lot to be desired. I then swapped Venusaur back in while I picked out the rewards for the team. They weren't brilliant, although I can see crit damage being useful in a pinch. I decided to test Pikachu's capabilities in the Challenge of the Mountain, but the 2 Stone Titans were ripping my frail defenses apart, so I had to quickly substitute him in favour of the bulky Blastoise. I won't pretend like this was an easy fight, forced to cower behind this rock and hoping that Blastoise could kill the Titans before they killed me, which miraculously he was able to pull through on. I wasn't able to celebrate, however, as I discovered that there was a 3rd Stone Titan somewhere in the vicinity. I tried throwing Charizard at the problem, but he just seems to want to fly high and not be a contributor, so I decided to throw Snorlax at him instead. This was a much better idea, as at least he could stun the beast and get rid of the wisps surrounding him too. This allowed the fight to just barely be won, and the prizes were a Titanic Knurl and another Runald's Band. The Knurl in particular is going to be a lifesaver if that fight was any indication, because it's only ever going to get harder. Once the teleporter was done, I decided to head through to the blue portal. If nothing else, I could give the Void Fields a try. The first round gets us some imps, which weren't much of a presence at first, as I was more focused on Venusaur doing this little jig. The carnage did ramp up once the little pests actually closed the gap though. I decided to grab a Bongus before investing in some gasoline, since crowd control feels like a necessity for a character like this. Eventually we were able to clear wave 1 and I grabbed a soldier syringe. Attack speed also feels valuable in a challenge like this. Swapping to Blastoise for wave 2, the enemy now has a 50% crit chance, which is, it's not great for me. Blastoise, however, didn't really seem to care, as he could cut through the imps with ease. Another soldier syringe is the prize. Wave 3 adds Alpha Constructs, which changes basically nothing for this wave. Surprise, I can claim another soldier syringe. Wave 4 adds backup mags to the fold, but it didn't really seem to make much of a difference. The prize for this wasn't a soldier syringe, instead it was another gas tank. Swapping back to Venusaur for wave 5, Brass Contraptions decided to join the battle, so I decided to give Pikachu a proper go to see if he could hold out. The answer seemed to err on the side of no, so I gave Glaceon the reins in the final throws of the wave, after which I got myself a guillotine. I put Snorlax up for wave 6, with the monsters having predatory instincts. This was basically just dodgeball for me, as Snorlax wandered around oblivious to everything going on around him. It did give me the idea to pick up some instincts of my own after it was over. Wave 7 was where Blastoise was subbed back in, with Bisons preparing to charge us down. Not that it mattered, as Blastoise was a natural at even sniping the dreaded contraptions out of the sky. I get myself an ignition tank for later. If nothing else, the bursts where I bring Charizard out to play will make him lay on a lot of damage. Wave 8 gives the monsters stealth kits, which isn't really that big a deal. This wave was just a little frantic owing to the alphas trying to take pot shots at us from all angles, but I could just about weather the storm to get a Hopoo Feather. The final wave gives the enemies Growth Nectar, which is essentially a nothing burger for them. Blastoise continued to give all of the enemies the business until I could finally clear the wave, granting me access to a red item. You'd think I'd go for the Dio, but I decided to go with the Desk Plant. This may prove to be one of the few situations where it'd be a lifesaver, seeing as how I have to depend on other creatures to attack for me. With no more threats on the field, I simply scoured the area for anything I might have missed. One whoopsie I made at the end was picking up the fireworks. Usually I'd be all for it, but this is a run where my minions are supposed to do the heavy lifting, not me. So I'd need to be careful and offload them at the first chance I get. Thankfully, getting to the wetland aspect granted me a quick opportunity to do just that. I also scrapped the Sticky Bomb for good measure before throwing Venusaur onto the field to test out the power boost. In truth, he probably wasn't the best choice for that, which I'd attribute to Leaf Storm being over before it can really get going and having pretty middling range. Knowing this, I decided to bring Pikachu out to play instead. Turns out, when he's not trying to work out what planet he's currently on, his Thunder Striking can lay waste to mobs of enemies at once. Who'd have guessed? It was after seeing this display of power that I made an unexpected upgrade, as this chest granted me a brilliant behemoth. So now all of my Pokemon can deal explosive damage to any enemy they encounter. To test this out, I had Blastoise go at it against the Wandering Vagrant, and his Hydro Pump into Rapid Spin combo broke them down in seconds. So far, the big guy seems to be my go-to when it comes to these holdouts. Right, on to the next stage. Rally Point Delta is next on the hit list, and I brought out Pikachu in the opening stages to give him a chance to lay waste to the local fauna. I also happened to come across a gesture in one of the Lunar Pods, so my Gorax Opus from all the way back in Titanic Plains is going to see a lot more use. I also get some bleed from a tri-tip dagger, which sounds like a good idea as most of the mods I have access to seem to focus on multi-hits in some capacity. Once I was done looting the place, I fired up the teleporter and an imp overlord is what greets me. 2 of them in fact. I threw Charizard at the problem again, and his supercharged flamethrower eviscerated their health bars. One thing I do want to bring up though is that the Pokemon's attack timers seem to be proximity based, as they don't seem to try and use their normal attacks unless you happen to be close to them. This makes Charizard a nightmare to try and command properly, as he spends most of his time flying high up in the air and away from where you'd usually reside. I still win the fight, but still, it's getting pretty irksome to try and get him to swipe his claws at something, or at least fly closer to the damn ground. Either way, I get my rewards and quickly skedaddle when I get the chance. Siren's Call's up next, and a more unique challenge that I never considered is that I'd need a Pokemon's help if I wanted to break the eggs and confront the Alloy Worship unit. I decided to delegate this potential task to Glaceon for the time being, which was appropriate as a magma worm was trying to swarm us. Now that I think about it, I know Pokerogue is something that has been getting traction for a while, and it could be something to dip my toes into. If it's anything like this in terms of premise, then I'll just consider this to be practice. Let me know what you think of the idea. Back to the here and now though, I came across a Shrine of the Mountain before racing around the map with Blastoise in tow to go hunting for eggs. And this time it's not for breeding shenanigans. This is also where I picked up a Bandolier. While this is usually not a front runner in terms of game-winning items, this may well help my team's efficiency immensely. If I have a way to chain special attacks, then this will absolutely help me. Before long, the giant flying disco ball was out and about, and I decided to give Mega Charizard X this battle. Being a flying enemy, I figured the flying member of my team would thrive. Unfortunately, his jank pathing was never going to make him all that efficient, relying solely on Flamethrower to lay on any actual damage. It whittled him down soon enough though, and I got another brilliant behemoth for my efforts. With about as much potential in this place brought out as I could, I ended up swarmed by 3 Solus control units. I didn't fancy their threat levels until one of them tried to send me on an actual space mission, but Venusaur's instant death laser was able to pick up the slack. Being just about able to hold everyone off, it was time to move on to stage 5. Sky Meadows is where I got sent to, and it's only here where I realized that the landing of the Pokeball itself procs the brilliant Behemoth explosion effect. It's not relevant in the grand scheme of things, I just thought it was amusing. The game put me through an emotional rollercoaster in a 10-second window by having me fail the Chance Shrine 4 times in a row, granting a red item on the 5th, only for it to be Growth Nectar. A third brilliant behemoth would have been a better alternative. Even the ukulele I got for Pikachu was better, as it ripped through this group almost instantly. I also added Will-o'-the-Wisp for more crowd damage, which I figured would be needed given the mountain shrine I activated 10 seconds ago. After getting the goods from this chance shrine, I decided to make a last-minute equipment swap to the Seed of Life. Sure, the Opus would be good for the team's overall performance, but I really don't know how they'll fare in the Mithrix fight, especially in the third phase with that pizza cutter attack of his. So having a guaranteed failsafe on hand sounded preferable. After scouring the land for whatever else I could find, I started the teleporter and was startled by multiple grandparents deciding to spawn right on top of me. While Pikachu's discharge was enough to lay waste to most of them, I was perturbed at the fact that I was in the range of their Spirit Bomb attack. Thankfully, one final burst of damage from my electrical friend was enough to win the day. 2 additional jumps proved to be my final reward as I finished up the teleporter event and moved on to the Elite 4 pillars. Figuring that it would be a good idea to offload some of the greens I didn't need anymore, I decided to trade for an unstable Tesla coil in the Cauldron Zone. The design pillar near the Cauldrons was a cakewalk that even gave me the idea to get another Wisp Jar from, and while I lost my delicate watch with my life nearly going afterwards, the Pillars of Blood went by in a flash. And the final pillar I charged, the Pillar of Soul, was a breeze, with a Venusaur accompanying me throughout it all. With these sideshows taken care of, I immediately brought my way to Mithrix's arena to begin the champion battle against the King of Nothing. My first partner was Pikachu, and unsurprisingly, his high speed, Tesla coil, and quick attacks proved to irritate the slower and lumbering Mithrix. There was just something inherently amusing about him just running after a Pokemon around a tenth of his size at best and not even paying the slightest bit of attention to the one who summoned him. It's kind of like Tom chasing after Jerry. He did eventually cotton on to my presence, figuring that by killing me, he'd be beheading the army of 7 and leaving them defenseless. But by the time he figured this out, it was already too late. Phase 2 time. I sent Charizard after the Lunar Chimeras in hopes that he'd be in his element. At the very least, he was better than the last aerial fight owing to the Tesla coil, so his flamethrower wasn't his only reliable attack anymore. When Phase 3 began, Mithrix, remembering the end of Phase 1, came for me right out of the gate and smacked me away like a baseball. Unfortunately for him, I had swapped in the ever-reliable Blastoise, who I had spin into him to draw his attention away from me. While my bulky water type just seemed to shrug off the Light Slicer move, my healing drones all went down at once. Not that it really mattered, as I had Blastoise finish the job while I subbed Snorlax in for the final phase. He laid on some decent damage to start, but I figured his range was an issue, so I swapped Pikachu in. His discharge was more potent, but with the accuracy he had, I needed something else. Luckily, my ace in the hole came in the form of Charizard and his flamethrower. The instant he got into range, his toasty fire breath melted Mithrix in seconds. My superiority to the King of Nothing had been proven, but because he's a sore loser, he tries to detonate the moon we stand on to try and go for the ultimate martyrdom kill. I say nuts to that as I use my ridiculous mobility to jump to the rescue ship. My final defense began with Glaceon, as they didn't have that much screen time in this video, and to be fair, they got me halfway through this before I subbed in Venusaur to carry things home. Soon enough, the final battle was wrapped up as I boarded the rescue ship, finishing the game and proving that yes, you can indeed beat Risk of Rain 2 as a Pokémon trainer. My closing thoughts for the mod itself are that it's an interesting way to handle the game, and it shows that Pokémon can operate in Risk of Rain 2's environments, and quite well at that. That said, combat with them can be a tad on the clunky side, as it's never really all that clear when a Pokemon's ready to attack, and the fact that proximity is a factor for them doing so can be a little bothersome. This is especially true for Charizard, who rarely if ever comes near you at times. That said, I know that this is a fairly new character mod, unlike a lot of the others that I tend to see, so I know that there's room for improvement to polish this thing up and be as good as I know it can be. Also, I know I got a little bit of personal damage via the Tesla coil in the closing stages, but I don't think it really impacts the result of this run. Let's be real, I would have been more than capable of beating Mithrix regardless. Unsurprisingly, I'm going to be shelving modded Risk of Rain 2 runs for the time being after this point, simply because Alloyed Collective will be hitting the scene soon, and the modding community will need time to play catch up with everything it's set to change. No doubt you'll see me hitting that expansion up and seeing what's what, but I'll save that experience for when it comes out. Either way, that's the end of this video. Throw us a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and feel free to leave any suggestions for future challenge runs in the comments below. I'm always open to ideas, and what you suggest to me could end up being a future video. But until that point comes along, I'll see you on whatever I do next. Take care now.